Welcome to the Global Classroom. This is the instructional video for the class Decision Making and Public Engagement in Cities, and we are focusing on Phoenix. My name is Arnim Wiek.
My name is Michael Bernstein.
And we're responsible for the problem-based learning track in the Global Classroom. The problem-based learning track is based on a problem-based learning framework that focuses on how do we generate solution strategies for urban sustainability problems. The framework is based on 3 different modules. The first one is when we think about solving a sustainability problem, we obviously need to understand what the sustainability problem is. We need to understand cause-effect relations within the problem so that we have a good baseline to start from. The second module is focused on potential solutions to those problems, what we call sustainability visions. What are those potential solutions is the guiding question of the second module. The third module makes the link between those 2 modules, and the guiding question is here: how will we achieve the solutions? How do we build transition strategies? What kind of skills do we need to perform those 3 different tasks we just described? We have identified a variety of competencies we would like to teach you to be capable of developing solution options to urban sustainability problems. The first skill set is related to systems thinking. Thinking systemically, thinking about cause-effect relations. That's what systems thinking is about. Futures-oriented thinking is primarily about solution options. Solution options are in the future. We need to build your capacity to think creatively, but also in a structured way about those solution options. The third element is related to values. Sustainability is a value-laden concept. It's all about trying to be capable of analyzing problems from a sustainability perspective, but also critically reflecting on solutions from a sustainability perspective. Are those solutions really sustainable? Finally, very critical capacity is strategic thinking. This is a skill that develops how you build strategies for change. Change is required to move us out of problematic situations and towards a sustainable future. Now, how do those competencies map onto the initial framework? First, for the problem state, we need systems thinking and value-oriented thinking. You need to thoroughly understand the problem from a sustainability perspective. For the potential solution options, you need systems thinking and value thinking again, but you also need to really think in a structured way about how can we accomplish this in the future. So futures thinking is an additional component here for this module. And finally, how do we make this happen? How will we achieve those solutions? That requires strategic thinking. Today we are focusing on decision making and public engagement in cities, and we draw on examples from Phoenix. We are particularly interested in 2 things. One, we want to understand how cities are governed, what decision making processes are happening in cities. On the other hand, we want to build your strategic competence and think about how do we induce, how do we create change in cities.
So in earlier videos, we talked about how cities change. We talked about an example from New York of a particular change maker who happened to run roughshod for almost 3 or 4 decades in the city and brought to life many, many different public projects at the cost of perhaps equity issues. This week, we want to focus more specifically on the decision-making context in cities. And we're going to use Phoenix as an example. So in the city of Phoenix, there's a very nice, neat decision-making structure tree, sort of a government-centered approach of citizens elect the mayor and council members. The council members and the mayor manage and give instructions to the city manager, and the municipal court adjudicates over controversial decisions. Now, what happens when you introduce the public and different stakeholders with different interests into the decision-making process?
So we want to differentiate here 3 different types of decision-making in cities. And as Michael pointed out, there are probably 2 extremes we're interested in. On the one hand side, we have government-centered decision-making. And this is very much like what Michael described in the ideal government structure of the city of Phoenix, with the election and then with the decision-making basically in the hands of the government. Now, over the last 10 to 20 years, a variety of other decision-making processes kind of emerged in cities. And we just want to focus on 2 other types, kind of contrasting the government-centered ones. One is still kind of with the lead of the government, public participation processes. You could imagine, for instance, a planning process in the city. The city of Phoenix currently undergoes a process of public participation and consultation related to the update of the general plan. The general plan is the master planning document, the planning framework for all detailed planning in the city. And this is largely led by government. So citizens and interest groups are asked to contribute or comment on the plan and give input to the plan. From this second type, we want to differentiate a third type that is significantly different, because it's not any longer government-led. Decision-making happens differently. A variety of different groups can take the lead on certain initiatives within the city. It could be, for instance, that a business association wants to create what we call a local economy. And they can take a lead on this, but they are not alone. Obviously, they want to coordinate with the government. They want to coordinate with non-profit organizations, with the citizens. But it's not any longer the lead with the government. It's the lead with one other constituency. The example you see here on one side of the screen is from the public participation process in one of our research projects, where we have exactly tried to bring a variety of different constituencies together. Apart from the researchers, we had non-profit organizations there, we had the government representation there as well, we had citizens there, and this is exactly this kind of decision-making that is far more balanced across the different constituencies. So we are here primarily interested in creating these structures as alternatives to the government-centered as well as the government-led public participation.
Mm-hmm. And one of the driving factors behind the transition from this government-centric approach to the open governance approach is the question of who rules. So who really rules in a government-centered approach, where you saw this nice breakout of city mayor, city council, city manager, but what are the interest groups behind the scenes that we don't see as citizens that influence decisions? What changes when you bring in an open governance perspective?
Yeah.
So this week we have a selection of readings from the web, a couple of videos, a couple of traditional print format readings that we're going to ask you to look at. The first few readings will deal with the government-centered approach. There's an entry on Wikipedia that we want you to read, just get the basics on different types of mayoral governance in cities in the US. The next will be a survey of several different cities and how their mayoral structures set up and the implications for that in decision making and change in cities. The next will be a reading, well actually it'll be a video on government-led participation, public participation, the idea of giving data into the hands of the public and having public's entrepreneurs, citizens, concerned citizens, business interest groups use the data to inform better decisions. And then we're going to ask you to go to the Open Government Initiative to check out a few examples of open government initiatives. And the third, as Arnim is getting ready to point out to you, is
this brochure. It's a description of the research projects we have done in our transition lab. It's a research group here at Arizona State University in the School of Sustainability. It focuses on sustainability transition and intervention research. It's very solution-oriented, and it gives you, with a variety of different projects, a nice overview of how we can start organizing a different type of decision-making, what we describe here as open governance, and what the role of science and what the role of research would be in those processes. So a variety of different examples in this brochure.
And we hope that the brochure will also give you an idea of some of the solutions-driven, problem-based work that you'll do in the problem-based learning section of research and further modules. So while you're reading, we want you to think about several things, as usual. We want you to think a little bit about the different types of decision-making in the city, just very generally. Who makes the decisions, who participates, who leads, who really rules. We want you to think about how well existing decision-making structures deal with sustainability challenges, and can you imagine better ones? We want you to think about legitimacy. So we ask the question, who rules? How representative are these different government positions, these different styles of governance in cities? How legitimate is it when you have a very sort of black box decision-making structure versus an open governance structure that might not actually have real representative power? What are those kinds of issues raised? We also want you to think about how decision-making structures in Lüneburg differ from those in Phoenix. Obviously, we focused on Phoenix in this instructional video, but this is the global classroom, and you have ways of engaging your peers overseas. We want you to start thinking about different ways governance takes shape in different cities.
Now, obviously, we want to get back to the different competencies we introduced earlier, and we try to build through the series of classes at the beginning of the global classroom to create a good fundament, a first initial set of those competencies. What we are focusing, as introduced earlier, what we are focusing on in this particular class is strategic competence and also systems thinking competence. But the specific learning objectives here related to those competencies are: we want you to be capable of comparing and contrasting different types of decision making in the city. We want you to be able to consider the benefits and drawbacks of those different types when it comes to implementing sustainability solutions. Always remember, we introduced those decision-making types in the city more from a general perspective, but eventually we're interested in building your competence to develop sustainability solutions. So you need to understand how decision-making happens in cities. At the same time, we need to understand how do we induce change? How do we take advantage of those decision-making processes? How do we might need to think very differently about how decision-making should be happening in order to address sustainability challenges. Very important as the global classroom, it's about cross-cultural dialogue with your international peers. So how cities and towns are governed differently in Phoenix and in Lüneburg, we want to build your capacity to articulate this and reflect on it. And finally, constructing ways of aligning general sustainability solution strategies with general structures of decision-making is probably the core here. You need to understand on the one hand side, but you also need to use those decision-making structures to think about sustainability solutions.
So again, in this video, we talked a lot about the decision-making context in cities, specifically in Phoenix. This is about building a systemic understanding of how change happens in cities, how decisions are made, because we want to be able to say, okay, given the way decisions are made, where can we influence decisions to enhance sustainability solutions?
We'll be back.
We'll be back.